favorite songs, maybe because I grew up with it. It entered the Methodist hymnal at the time, or began to be sung in the Methodist churches that I was part of when I was probably a young teenager. And I remember hearing it for the first time. And I remember hearing it the first time with a Descan and thought, that's probably one of the songs that when we get to heaven, they'll be singing at the gate. I hope so. We're going to read this morning, and I'm going to ask you if you're able to stand for the reading of the gospel, remembering that this is the Word of God for the people of God. Will you stand for the good news? From Luke, the 9th chapter. I'm just going to read just part of the scripture listed this morning. I'm going to read the part beginning in verse 57 of the 9th chapter. And as they were going along the road, someone said to Jesus, I will follow you wherever you go. And Jesus said to him, foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. And another said to Jesus, follow me. And he said, Lord, let me first go and bury my father. And Jesus said to him, leave the dead to bury their own dead, but as for you, go and proclaim the kingdom of God. And yet another said, I will follow you, Lord, but let me first say farewell to those at my home. And Jesus said to him, and this is a key verse, no one who puts his hand to the plow and looks back is fit for the kingdom of God. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. And let us affirm our faith in these, using the words of the Apostles' Creed. I believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, and in Jesus Christ, his only Son, our Lord, who was conceived by the Holy Ghost, born of the Virgin Mary, suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, dead, and buried. He descended into hell. The third day he rose again from the dead. He ascended into heaven and sitteth on the right hand of God the Father Almighty. From thence he shall come to judge the quick and the dead. I believe in the Holy Ghost, the Holy Catholic Church, the communion of saints, the forgiveness of sins, the resurrection of the body, and the life everlasting. Amen. Traveling this week, and I went and spent some time with my mom, and then later carried her from Johnson City to Springboro or Waynesville, Ohio, to stay with my sister for the following 2 weeks. My youngest sister, Debbie, and her husband David flew out on Tuesday to Australia, actually Perth, Australia, the western side, where their son teaches in seminary out there, and their grandchildren. Now, Lynette and I had this conversation a couple of years ago. If our grandchildren were away from us in quarantine, we'd just have to become Australian citizens, I believe. We'd have to move out there. But Debbie and David went, and we're praying for them as they travel. Does anybody know what Australians do? They don't call it going on vacation. What do they call it? Anybody know?
Holiday.
Holiday. And they all go together. I mean, the entire community packs up, and they all leave the towns and the cities, and they go out into the country, into the billabongs, and to the places, and they hunt crocodile. Now, I don't know about that, but that's what you get from the movies. And I asked Debbie, I said, are y'all going to do it? She said, yeah, we're actually going to get there, get off the plane, and then we're going to drive 5 more hours north up the coast the west coast of Australia place, and they were going to be on holiday there with their grandchildren and with their son and daughter-in-law. So pray for them too. They're having a good time on that. But one of the things that I noticed when I travel is that that there's something that goes on everywhere, and I only thought it went on in places like the Mississippi Delta, that people till the fields. They plow, they harvest. Whether it's eastern Kentucky, although not as much there, it's more into mining. Whether it's in southern Ohio, where there are some beautiful farmlands right around where my sister and brother-in-law live. But then you come back through Tennessee. On the way back, I came through West Tennessee, and there are places there north of Adamsville, Lexington, beautiful land, farm, tilled. And then, of course, I think about my days in the Delta when you have miles and miles and acres of land under cultivation. But I'll be honest, I've never plowed a day in my life. Anybody here ever plowed? Anybody? Let's see, I figured. Oh, well, you sort of went up there. Yeah. You did plow some, though, had to. Living in Goodman, Mississippi, you had to plow. You're at that age. Charles did. Jim, did you ever do any? Dr. Slope, of course, you plowed. John's daddy taught about instruments that did plow. Jim, did you ever plow? Have to plow? No. Okay. All right. Richard? What did? All right. You don't intend to. George? Just some. Yeah, that and that. Yeah. Linda Karen. Now, y'all get this. Can y'all picture Linda Karen singing opera in Germany and plowing in Mississippi? What a multi. No, I'm serious. I knew you were John McCurder said it one day. Said, don't we have a lot of get here? We found out that our choir director and pianist is a plower by nature. So, when did you? But just curious, when did you plow?
My granddad is in Georgia.
In Georgia. Well, do you remember what was being planted after you plowed?
I have no idea.
No idea. Well, I've never plowed, but I want to say about this text today. If you think this text is hard, I want to read you something my main source of Greek when I study the scriptures each week as a Presbyterian minister out in California. His last name is Davis. And here's what he said about this text. In fact, particularly when Jesus says to them, well, you can't come unless you leave your father's grave alone. You can't come unless you're willing to do all these things. And of course, then he sums it up by saying, if you put your hand to the plow, no man is fit once he starts plowing to stop plowing. And I guess he's speaking of the kingdom. Here's what David said. He said, I've studied this text for over 40 years, and I have no idea what Jesus is trying to say. This is a man who taught Greek in seminary. This is a man who preaches every Sunday, has probably preached this even more than I have, and I don't know about that, but it's a hard text. Somebody said it's almost as hard as Trinity Sunday, which was a couple of weeks ago. It's hard because it's about something that doesn't make much sense. Why would Jesus discourage people from following him? Why? Why would he do that? Especially for those of us who live in the age of easy invitation. And by the way, I don't mean that to be cute, but I've been to all sorts of church growth events or discipleship events, and I've been to it both in the Methodist and Presbyterian church. I've even gone to non-denominational events because everybody wants their churches filled with people who are following Christ. We have a church full this morning of people who are following Christ. That includes you. So why would he do that? Well, I had some lessons from plowing. I do remember I had not direct knowledge of my grandfather, my paternal grandfather plowing, but my dad and his brother Zeb. I've not preached much about Zeb, but I have preached about Mama Matt. This is to say that my grandmother, my paternal grandmother, had 10 children, and Zeb was the favorite. Not my daddy, In fact, my Aunt Eunice, who I saw this week as well, used to say that my daddy, as he was on his deathbed, said this. He said, "Eunice, why did Mama Mac like Zeb better than me?" Now, that's pretty profound, and we don't want to unpack all that. But it is to say that Daddy and Zeb, they were only a few months. They were just. I don't want to say they were 9 months apart, but it was pretty close. They were close growing up. They did things together when they were in the military. This is true. Zeb stole a Jeep and found Daddy in southern Germany and went AWOL to find my daddy while he was 300 or 400 miles away. I don't know if he got in trouble for that. My Uncle Zeb gave my daddy all of his poker earnings that he had earned all during World War II and gave them to Daddy to go back on the boat to the United States and North Carolina. And my daddy forthwith lost all the money gambling on the boat. They were thick. Now, you know, you're thick when you give your brother your gambling earnings or losings. But anyway, they would tell stories about how they trained the mules that my granddaddy used to plow. And they would train the mules so that the mules would then, I don't know how they did it, they would say, get a crowd of younger boys and girls around. They say, "Do you like him?" And the mule would shake his head like this. And they'd say, "Do you like me?" And the mule would shake his head like this. And they say, "Do you like that little boy over there?" And the mule would go like this. Now, they did that for their amusement and who knows what all. But my granddaddy did plow some, and they would tell stories about him plowing. And when he hitched up the mule, he made sure that the mule had on something called blinders. Anybody know what blinders look like? I think, I haven't seen it, but I think you could probably find a picture if you were to look online of a mule with blinders. And I often wondered why that was. And the purpose of that was so that the mule would go straight. So as my grandfather and anybody else that plowed back then, maybe some of you know this, that he'd get his place behind the plow, through a harness connected to the reins over the shoulder, grab the handles of the plow, and urge the mule forward with some kind of little clicking noise. See, I did that pretty good. That was close. I remember my daddy telling the story about getting corrected one time because he tried to distract the mule while it was plowing. And he said it was the most stern rebuke that his daddy, by the way, who my grandfather was one of the kindest, most gentle men. We talked about that this week with my cousins and my Aunt Eunice, and they agreed that he had to be kind and gentle because he was married to my grandmother. But anyway, we won't go there. But whatever went on, and whatever happened, I think there's some truth when Jesus says of this thing about plowing, and once you put your hand to the plow, because I think if you're going to be in the kingdom and you're going to be a follower of Jesus, you have to follow a straight path. You know, Jesus said something sort of like this later on. He says, you know, the path that leads to salvation is narrow and straight. The path that leads to that other place, to that other kind of life, is not. I think that going straight really matters. I think following, and once you start following, and once you start plowing, to stop plowing would be to stop in the middle of the field. To get distracted and go off would leave a crooked road. And I can tell you in the Delta, when they get to the end of the turn rows, what those look like. And I've been there. Y'all, Charles, you've seen those all your life. You can't grow a lot at the end of the turn road, can you? You grow the real fruit of the crop out in the middle of the field where the rows are straight. So I think, there's a lesson here maybe in this about plowing. And about plowing straight. And about staying on course and staying focused. And by the way, this is so generic that I'm sure some psychologist or some teacher has told you this, or some parent has told you this all your life. You need to stay on the what? The straight and narrow. You need to stay focused. My sister and I were, both sisters and I were talking, Debbie in Johnson City, then when I got to Waynesville, Mary and I were talking that one of our favorite teachers at Northside High School in Jackson, Tennessee, had died recently. Her name was Miss Harden. Miss Harden was my senior English teacher. I was in Northside one year. My dad had been transferred from Jackson, Mississippi to Jackson, Tennessee, and I was a newbie and in school 1 year. But for some reason, Miss Harden took an interest in me. And I later learned what it was, because when my sister 2 years later came into her class, she looked at her last name and she said, "Are you Ronnie McDougald's sister?" And they said she fainted and fell over the desk, nearly dead. And then 5 years after that, when my little sister came along, she said, "Tell me you're not Ronnie McDougald's sister." And she said, "Oh yes, but I'm the last of them." And she said, "Thank God." Now, Miss Harden and I had a problem. My problem was that I had a lack of focus. Adderall did not come along in time for me, by the way. Should have. But I could go and bounce and all that. I remember she gave me the assignment my senior year. She said, you need to take one of George Orwell's books and you need to do your senior paper on it. And I said, "Well, which one do you want me to write on?" And she said, "Well, there's two good ones. There's 1984 and there's Animal Farm." And I thought, well, Animal Farm sounds better than a year, because a year is going to be specific and I can be real generic and I don't really have to read the book, and I can sort of, and animals, I can just kind of make up stuff about the animals. And so I'll be honest, I never read Animal Farm. I still haven't read Animal Farm. So I wrote my report, and she said, "It's got to be in by such and such a day." And of course it was 4 days late, but that was okay. And she accepted it, and she wrote the paper. She stayed frustrated with me that entire second semester. "You're not going to graduate if you don't pass senior English." And I said, "Well, how do I pass senior English?" She said, "By paying attention to me." Well, she got up and decided she would prove a point. She got up, for those that half the class had done Animal Farm, half had done 1984. She said, "Those of you who read 1984, y'all stay put. Those of you who read Animal Farm, I want to read you Ronnie McDougald's paper." And she started reading it aloud in the classroom. And I turned first green, and then I turned red, and then I was sick at my stomach, and then I thought, "Oh my." And they all began to laugh. And she didn't mean to shame me, but she did. And she turned to me and she said, "It is so well written, I'm going to give you an A and I'm going to pass you in senior English, but I ought to whip your butt right here in the class." Because she said, it has nothing to do whatsoever with the book. Focus, straightness. Plowing requires it. Can I say something? Senior English may not if you have a really grace-filled teacher like Miss Harden, but life requires it. But especially kingdom participation requires it. And what's the focus? Well, there are three things that Jesus mentioned earlier that will get us off focus. And there are really more than three, but these are the three things he illustrates. The first thing is, obviously, it's about, let me go take care of, let me say goodbye to my family. No specific order. Let me say goodbye to my family. Let me divert. Let me get off track. Let me go over here and get my focus and my attention to something else. Now, here's what I believe, and Davis also believes this, so I believe it. I believe Jesus was intending these words almost more for the people who were already following him. So this is church folks. So if you are already following Jesus, here's what you need to do. You need to think about the number of times you say, "I will do something, but if," or "only if," or "but," is prefacing your statement. "I'll be happy to serve on the session, but not this year. I'll be happy to help with that project at the church, but I'd rather give you just some more money and let you work toward that because I'm not very good at that." Oh, now I'm picking on you, and that's why this passage is so difficult, because I can say something and every one of you will be offended today. But that's the first thing. The man who says, "Well, I'll follow you, but first let me go take care of my business and say goodbye to my family and all that." You see, Jesus is really laying down a pretty straight line here, and it's pretty hard to follow, which is, I'm first. I'm not only first, I'm only. Kingdom, following, is a one-track road. And then there's the guy who says, well, I have really something urgent to take care of. Now, here's my Jewish understanding of Jewish culture at the time. Do you know that a son was obligated to his father until his father died? Do y'all know that? How many of you know that? You know that because of the prodigal son story. Because the son wants to leave early, and this father says, okay, I'll go ahead as if I'm dead and give you part of my estate. In fact, gives it to the older son. The good son, the older son, says, yeah, I'm obligated. I'm going to stay here. No matter what my urges and my desire to be my own person are, I'm going to stay here and be a good Jewish son. But you see, here's what Jesus is saying. The son is saying, I can follow you, but I'm obligated to be a good Jewish boy. Not the kingdom. Even the most important kind of commitments that we have in life, Jesus says, no, that's not a good excuse. So, I don't know how to get this any more clear. But following Jesus involves no excuses. It's hard. It's hard for those of us that have been doing it all our lives. It's hard when we call people to that. In fact, that's why Jesus said, before you go and do anything like this, you need to do what? You need to count the cost. And before you do this, you need to hear this. If you're going to be in the kingdom, you need to take up your cross and follow me. And that literally means follow me to the death, to the end, all the way. He even talked about this one time about the son, about the servant who said, yeah, I'll go do it, and didn't do it. And the servant says, no, I don't want to do it, and does it. He says, which one is the most important in the kingdom? It's the one that does it. It's not the one that preaches the best or pronounces things the best or who shows up on a regular basis. It's the one who fulfills the kingdom all the way to the end. Now, this is a big guilt trip for preachers, for congregations, and maybe that's why David said, I don't know what to make of this, because when you preach it to people, you automatically know they're going to put some guilt on them, and God, for goodness sakes, I don't want to do that today. You don't need any more shame and guilt in your lives. None of you do. But I read something recently that North American Christians in particular, by the way, if you've been overseas, you know that this is not quite as true, that maybe the church is more alive in Africa and in Asia and other places because the commitment level is a little more alive in those places. The North American Christians, someone wrote, we give an hour on Sunday, we drop 2 to 4%, that's the average, by the way, of church members in the play. And if we're really involved in teaching class or serve on a committee, maybe. So if plowing doesn't work for you, how about this metaphor? This is music. Consider that the professional musician and the hours of practice and rehearsal with years of lessons that go into mastering an instrument. What about athletes who dream of winning an Olympic medal? Think about the time and commitment they give, and so on and so on and so on. So no wonder Jesus' words are so strong. He knows our human nature. He knows how hard it is for us to commit and say, and by the way, us would include Peter and James and John and the ones he called initially. He's not cutting them any slack either. He also knows our tendency to take our eyes off the prize, to look back, to falter, to find excuses. And thanks to God that he offers us grace that we can plow. That we can plow. Which means in the second plowing metaphor, plowing is serious business. If in the old days when my grandfather in the 30s was plowing, he didn't plow the field and the crop wasn't planted, people didn't eat. It's serious business. And any kind of thing that takes us away from plowing can result in crooked furrows and less crop and all sorts of bad consequences. I had a good friend on the Gulf Coast. He later became the bishop of the Lutheran Church. He was a Tennessee boy, but they sent him up to North Dakota, by the way, Jim, to preach early on in his ministry. He was in a church up there, and you know yourself, there are some really big farms up there. There's some big ranches and big farms, and he said that he had a farmer as a member of one of his congregations, and he said he put him in the tractor, and he said, he said, I need to jump down and do something, and he jumped down out of the tractor. It was one of these big IH case or John Deere tractors, and it had the cover over it and all the bells and whistles with it, protected from the rain and the heat and the dust. And he said he was so tempted, and he said he started to reach for he said he had just enough experience growing up in Tennessee that he thought he could drive the tractor. And he said when the farmer saw him reach for the gears to put it in the gear to move it, he screamed at him and said, "Don't you touch that thing!" And the reason he did it was because he said, this is not a place for some part-time driver, this field. It's not a place for some greenhorn. It's a place for somebody who's a serious farmer. Jesus is saying, the kingdom of God is a place for serious Christians. Serious commitment. Ever-deepening commitment. So plowing means to keep focused. Plowing means to be serious. And here's another thing. Plowing ultimately changes the land. Am I right about that? Was it in the 30s, or maybe it was, where they went in and they began to get concerned. In fact, after the Dust Bowl, it became really serious because people said, you gotta plow your land a certain way. Who's our friend out at Dorman Hall that worked on non-tillable land? What's his name? Lynette's friend, the older gentleman. Glover Triplett. Got a patent, I think, on something that he designed, because we don't want the soil to wash away. Because when you plow the ground, when you plow the land, you mark the land. And when you mark the land, you change the land. Now here's a really great thought, and it's just my thought. This is me, original me. Maybe that's why Jesus wanted serious people to put their hand to the plow and stay with it, because the purpose of the kingdom of God is to change things. Oh, you don't think so? If any man is in Christ, he's a new creature. Behold, the old things have passed away. What happens? All things become what? New. Jesus, I think, doesn't want us plowing just recreationally. I have at my house a device that hitches up to my weed eater top, and it's got a little tillers on it. It's like a little tiller, and you can get that and you can play with it. And I've made a mess out of certain places in my backyard with that thing. It's not. I'm not really changing the land. I'm just scarring it up. But plowing changes the contour of the land. It changes the slope. It changes the way it looks. If you've ever seen a fresh, by the way, there is nothing more beautiful in my mind than some of that freshly plowed land over in the ice cream land over in the Delta. Am I right, Charles? That's some of the pretty, it almost looks like it's glowing, and it's so black, and it looks like it's alive. It's got so much stuff and nutrients in it. Miss Hatcher's mom over in Columbus, Barbara Moore, told me that when she was growing up on the Scott Plantation, she said that they turned that, there was nothing better than watching that dirt where it had been brown or green and been turned over and been opened up so that it can create new life. Can I tell you something? I sort of wonder if Jesus had that in mind when he said, when you plow, you're creating new life. When you plow, you're creating the possibility of fruit. When you plow, you're creating the possibility of change. Oh, I don't know when it was. It's been a while back. But plowing leaves its mark. Dietrich Bonhoeffer said this. You know, he wrote Cost of Discipleship, and every good seminary student in my era had to read it. And you read it, and you read all about those famous quotes, you know, about the cost of discipleship. But I remember when he came to New York City before he went back to Germany at the beginning of World War II, and he taught at Union Seminary there, and here's what he said while there. He said, in New York they preach about virtually everything. Only one thing is not addressed, or is addressed so rarely that I have yet been unable to hear it, namely the gospel of Jesus. So that what stands in its place of the Christian message, an ethical and social idealism born by a faith in progress that who knows how claims the right to call itself Christian. And in the place of the church as the congregation of believers in Christ, there stands the church as a social corporation or as a social club. Anyone who has seen the weekly program of any of the large New York churches with their daily, indeed almost hourly events, teas, lectures, concerts, charity events, opportunities, sports games, bowling, dancing, he says, for every age group. Anyone who has become acquainted with the embarrassing nervousness with which pastor lobbies for membership, that person can well assess the character of such a church. In order to balance out the feeling of inner emptiness that arises now and then, and partly also to refill the church treasury, some congregations will, if possible, engage in evangelists for revival once a year. The church is really no longer the place where the congregation hears and preaches and lives out the God's word, but rather the place where one acquires secondary significance as a social entity for this or that purpose. By the way, Bonhoeffer was invited to stay in New York. He did. He went back to Germany. You know what happened. He stood up against Hitler and he died in the concentration camp just a few days before it was liberated in 1945. No one could ever accuse Bonhoeffer of not plowing the field, not making a difference. Those words were written almost 100 years ago now. Luke, in this passage, clearly marks the cost for those entering and receiving the kingdom of God. And I guess it was Mark Twain who said it this way: it's not the things in the Bible that I don't know that worry me, it's the things that I do know. So we know this. We know this. So, have you got excuses? Have I got excuses for not following through and plowing straight and staying in the field when we need to stay in the field? Absolutely. Can we make up reasons that are pretty legitimate? Yes. And gosh, who knows? Got to go bury my dad. Got to go take care of Billy. Got to go say goodbye to my family. Got to do this. Got to do that. There are a lot of things that I need to be doing. But I will say this: that Jesus was speaking this to people that are already following him. So don't get fearful and worried. This is not a culling out process. No, but it's a moving forward process. Hear me. Jesus never called a perfect follower. But he did call those that he would remind again and again and again and again what the following was for, what it was about. I love fellowship meals at the church. I would never eliminate them. I love having time to socialize and be part of the church. I hope it's not part of that. I just hope that the things that we do never take the place of what our real following of Jesus is about. Was in Winchester, Virginia. I wish the Zittas were here. That's up in their neck of the woods. I guess it's been several years ago. I was on my way to Maine to catch up with Lynette, who had flown up there to spend time with our children in their house they have up in Maine, Tom and Rebecca. And we were driving. I was going through the valley there, and I stopped in Winchester, and they had a museum there, and I thought it was interesting. It was a kind of a Civil War museum, and I walked around it, and it said Civil War artifacts. It had stuff about Stonewall Jackson, and I'm a Civil War buff, and so I got there about the middle of the day. It was lunchtime. I'd found somewhere to eat there in Winchester, and I walked and I looked, and there was no one there to go. There were several doors and entrances. I walked to the front when it was so I walked around to what I thought was the front door, and it was open, standing open. I walked in and began to tour, and I was about halfway through it, and I hear this shrill voice saying, "What are you doing?" It was the little old lady wearing a Confederate uniform. I promise you, she had on the gray. I guess she thought I was a Yankee invader. I don't know what she thought, but she said, "Didn't you see the door?" And I said, ma'am, I said, I came in the door. And she said, no, didn't you see the front door? And the front door, by the way, in my mind was the back door. But she said, clearly marked on the front door, it says, if no one's here, please place the price of the ticket in the basket. I went, wow. Wow. By the way, Winchester changed hands 77 times in the Civil War. I think it was Winchester that lost more men in World War II on D-Day than any other town in America. I think that's true. They know about commitment there. The house itself had gone back to Washington's time. And I said, well, ma'am, I looked around, I tried to rationalize because honestly, I had just a little bit of money, and she brought me around the door and it said $10 entrance fee. And I think I had $3 or $4 in cash in my pocket. And I tried to go through and give her the explanation and all of that. And I've tried to say to her, and then I made the big mistake. I said, ma'am, maybe y'all should mark all the doors that way. She said, I've been here 37 years. I've never had somebody try to cheat to get in. As I drove out of Winchester, by the way, she let me go for the $3. As I drove out of Winchester, I thought, well, there's a parable. I thought about that the other day. That's a parable of the church. Is our church clearly marked as being a place where people can join in and following Jesus? Is it clearly marked what the price of admission is? And aren't you glad that the price of admission is filled with grace? So I want to give you 2 words today. Be careful in your following. Be consistent in your following. Be urgent in your following. Not with each other. Don't push and nudge and point at each other. Don't correct someone else's following, but make sure your hand is still on the plow and that you've got the blinders on the mules and that you stay the course all the way to the end of the field. Let's pray. Lord, you clearly got your disciples' attention. They put this in the scripture. And you clearly have our attention. And you want us to follow because the way of following you is the way that leads to life. The way that to follow you leads to life in the kingdom, part of the kingdom, part of the great feast, part of the great fellowship, part of the great joy of being not just created and made by God, but claimed as God's own child. Help us to do that today as a church, as individuals. Help us to ask ourselves the question, how am I following? Am I distracted easily? Do I get off track? Or help us to follow in ways that say, Lord, I know my road is straight because I'm paying attention to you, what you want for my life, my family's life, my church's life. Help us to do that, we ask, in the name of the one who teaches us to pray, saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen. We're going to sing, Oh Master, Let Me Walk With Thee, 738. Don't wait until the end, but as you come, the basket is here you see it on the table. Bring what you have, a check, cash. If you don't have anything today, you can see Pat and get it to her this week or sometime, anytime. But as we sing this is a way of responding. We want to help the hungry. This is one way of plowing our field, being involved in ministries that change lives and transform them and help them. So as we sing together, you'll come and bring your 2 cents a meal offering. Oh Master, let me walk with thee. Let's stand as we sing.